fully loaded 747 is flying over one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth. Smoke is filling the cabin, and the only way to save 159 people is for the crew to open the doors. Midair, at altitude, Valerie Lota, daughter of victims on board, once said,
First thought, I think, for many, many South Africans was what was on that plane.
The first thought, I think, for many, many South Africans was, what was on that plane? And today, we are going to understand exactly why that question has never been answered. A desperate maneuver no pilot had trained for. Passengers already overcome before help could arrive. And a mystery tied to a nation's most isolated era that still remains unresolved. To understand what really happened on November 28, 1987, we first need to understand why this flight even existed and why it was flying such an unusual path across the world. In the late 1980s, South African Airways was not operating like a typical airline. Due to international sanctions during the apartheid era, its aircraft were banned from flying over much of Africa. That meant longer routes, unusual stopovers, and flights that spent extended periods far from any nearby airport. The aircraft that night was the Helderberg, a Boeing 747 Combi, a unique design that carried both passengers and cargo on the same main deck. Efficient, flexible, but, as we will see, not without its risks. On November 28, 1987, Flight 295 departed Taipei, heading for Johannesburg, with a refueling stop planned in Mauritius. On board were 159 people. Among them were Valerie Lota's parents, returning from a business trip that had turned into a short vacation. 9 hours into the journey, deep over the Indian Ocean, everything seemed routine. Until suddenly, it wasn't. It was in that isolated stretch of ocean, hundreds of kilometers from land, that a single alarm broke the silence of the cockpit. And from that moment on, everything changed. Picture this, a calm cockpit, instruments steady, the aircraft cruising smoothly through the night. Then suddenly, a warning, a smoke alarm triggered in the main deck cargo area, just behind the last row of passengers. At first, it might have seemed manageable. But within moments, the situation escalated. The fire was not contained. It was spreading. As crew members attempted to respond, the aircraft itself began to fail around them. Circuit breakers started tripping, one after another. Systems went offline. Navigation instruments flickered. Communication became unstable. And in the cabin, the situation was becoming unbearable. Thick, toxic fumes began to fill the space. Passengers struggled to breathe. Visibility dropped. Time was running out. The crew followed procedure. They initiated an emergency descent toward Mauritius, still more than 300 kilometers away. But then came a decision that almost no pilot had ever practiced. To clear the smoke, Captain Ooze brought the aircraft down to around 14,000 feet. He reduced speed dramatically. And then, he gave the order to open the cabin doors mid-flight. Think about that for a moment. At altitude, over open ocean, with 159 people on board, the goal was simple: force the smoke out. But the reality was far more chaotic. Cockpit audio recording captured the moment. Close the bloody door. Joe, switch up quickly. Then close the hole on your side. The doors were briefly opened, then shut again. Inside the cockpit, confusion, urgency, rapid decisions, and then silence. At 14:08 a.m., Flight 295 disappeared from communication. No distress call, no final explanation, just a signal gone. Mauritius declared an emergency 36 minutes later. But by then, the aircraft was no longer in the sky. The plane was gone. 159 people, and almost nothing left behind. Just a small oil slick, scattered debris, and a handful of recoveries. So the question became, how do you investigate something that now lies nearly 5 kilometers beneath the ocean? Have you ever wondered what it takes to investigate an aircraft that vanished into one of the deepest parts of the ocean? For lead investigator Rennie Van Zyl, the challenge was unprecedented. The wreckage lay at a depth of nearly 900 meters, deeper than most previous recovery attempts had ever reached. And the black box signals. They would only last about 30 days. Time was not just limited, it was disappearing. The search began with sonar scans, sweeping vast areas of the ocean floor. For 2 months, nothing definitive appeared. Then finally, a breakthrough. The wreckage site was located, but finding it was only the beginning. Recovering it required something entirely new. Operation Resolve was launched, deploying a remotely operated submersible called the Gemini, connected by a custom-built fiber optic cable stretching 7 kilometers. This had never been done before at this scale, and exactly 1 year after the aircraft disappeared, the wreckage was reached. Piece by piece, investigators began to rebuild the story. The cockpit voice recorder was recovered, but it held only 81 seconds of usable audio. Just enough to confirm one thing: the fire was far more intense than anyone had expected. Circuit failures cascaded. Up to 80 systems may have gone offline. Then came the physical evidence. A tennis racket melted, requiring temperatures above 600 degrees Celsius. A fire extinguisher still charged, but fused to surrounding materials. And 3 wristwatches recovered from floating luggage that helped establish the exact moment the aircraft went down. The origin of the fire was traced to a cargo pallet filled largely with computer equipment and packaging materials. But what caused it? That question remained unanswered. And as the investigation reached its limits, its lead investigator made a statement that captured both professionalism and frustration. Rennie Van Zyl, lead crash investigator, once said, "I would have felt a lot better if we had been in a better position to give more factual information. But we were not going to fabricate." They had the wreckage. They had the data, but they did not have the full answer, and what they discovered next would shift attention from the fire itself to the very design of the aircraft. What happened next shocked even experienced investigators. The Boeing 747 Combi had a fundamental design difference. Unlike standard aircraft, it carried cargo and passengers on the same main deck, separated only by a partition. The assumption was simple: pressure differences would keep smoke contained. But that assumption did not hold. The fire's heat disrupted the pressure balance entirely. Smoke moved freely into the passenger cabin. To understand why, investigators revisited the original certification tests. Those tests had used a small, controlled fire, a bale of tobacco leaves. Slow burning, predictable. When the scenario was recreated using actual cargo pallets, wrapped in modern packaging materials, the results were dramatically different. The fire was faster, hotter, more aggressive, and then there was the checklist. The crew had followed it exactly, but one step, turning on recirculating fans, may have unintentionally drawn toxic gases from the cargo hold into the cabin. One recovered individual showed extremely high levels of carbon monoxide. The fire had not been contained, and the system assumed it had been. Barry Strauch, NTSB investigator, once said, "We think the fire had never been extinguished, and the crew's attempts to make the situation better may have in fact made the situation worse." Think about that. Every correct action may have made the situation more difficult. Not because of human error, but because the system itself was not designed for this kind of event. The consequences were far-reaching. South African Airways retired its 747 Combi fleet. By 1993, new regulations were introduced, changing how cargo fires were managed. And by 2002, the Combi design had effectively disappeared from commercial aviation. But even with all these answers, one question remained: what actually started the fire? And the answer, many believed, was not written anywhere in the official records. I need an answer for why I was orphaned at 14. That was Valeria Lota, years after the event. And her question goes beyond engineering. It goes into geopolitics. At the time, South Africa was under strict international sanctions. It could not openly import certain materials, and there were growing suspicions that national carriers may have been used to transport restricted cargo. Now, this is based on publicly available information and is presented here purely for educational awareness. Some experts began to question whether the cargo on Flight 295 matched its official manifest. One theory focused on a substance known as ammonium perchlorate, used in rocket propellants. Forensic analysis suggested the fire behaved in a way that standard materials could not explain. A microscopic iron particle found on cargo netting showed signs of moving at high velocity, while molten, suggesting a fire with its own oxidizing source. But this theory was never officially confirmed. In 1998, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission reviewed the case. It concluded that none of the listed cargo items could have caused the fire. But the hearings were held behind closed doors, and instead of resolving questions, they raised more. Further investigation was recommended. It never happened. Years later, new testimonies emerged, including claims that concerns about the cargo had been raised before departure. But again, no definitive conclusion, and perhaps the most powerful statement came from the very investigator who led the search for answers. Rennie van Zyl once said, "I believe that those people are still out there that know exactly what happened to that aircraft. I just feel they should have a heart for the families and bring out that information." And that is where the story stands, not closed, not fully understood, but never forgotten. Flight 295 left behind two legacies. One of them is clear. It changed aviation new safety standards, improved cargo handling, the end of the 747 combi era. The work of investigators like Rennie van Zyl pushed the limits of what was possible, reaching depths no one had explored before and uncovering answers that made future flights safer. But the second legacy is more difficult. It is the absence of a complete answer. 159 people, families across continents, memorials in Taiwan and South Africa, and questions that remain open decades later. This story is not just about a single flight. It is about how systems, decisions, and unanswered questions can leave real human stories incomplete, and about the people who continue to ask, even when the answers are out of reach. So the next time you look at a map or board a flight, remember this: not every story in aviation ends with certainty. Some remain suspended in time, waiting to be understood.